right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Workplace Therapy Podcast, brought to you by Unity & Company. At Unity & Company, we work with leaders and teams to catalyze cultural transformation and team performance. Now, my name is Scott Arrieta. I'm the CEO of Unity & Company, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to our very special guest today, Ellin Sidell. Ellin Sidell is the CEO of the Sidell Method, a boutique talent development firm specializing in influence, leadership coaching, and high-performance team development. With decades of experience inside Fortune 500 companies, including Nestlé, Microsoft, and Costco, she's built a career at the intersection of behavioral science and leadership, helping professionals and organizations master the skills that drive success. Ellin's expertise spans executive coaching, corporate training, and organizational development, with a strong focus on ethical influence, neuroplasticity, and strengths-based leadership. She's helped leaders at all levels gain buy-in, strengthen team dynamics, and advance their careers by applying science-backed influence strategies. Ellin, we're so excited to have you on the show today.
So great to be with you, Scott, and with all your audience.
Absolutely. So right off the bat, I want to congratulate you on the release of your book, which is titled The Influence Advantage: Practical and Proven Examples to Ethically Persuade in Business and in Life. Can you tell us a little bit more about this book and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it is a compilation book. There's six of us Cialdini uh, Institute founders and influence coaches that each wrote a chapter. And it was for my chapter, it was kind of a funny thing because it's only been in the last 2 years that I actually received all the education and learning about Dr. Cialdini's influence principles. But his book is a best-selling book that's been on the book list for like 40 years, 30 something years. And it's called Dr. Cialdini is Cialdini, and it's psychology or influence the psychology of persuasion. And I realized that when I read his book and got certified, that I had figured out these influence principles through trial and error over 35 years. And please don't do that. It's super painful. And so I kind of reinterpreted my last, 3 companies and went, "Oh my goodness, that's crazy." And all of these stories that I sort of carried inside of me, I looked at with a new lens to which influence principles did I successfully use. And so I really think, and I'm sure we'll dive in more, please don't do this the hard way. Get someone who's, a coach and who understands these principles. And I'm not so sure how frequently they're applied to leadership. Dr. Chelney's book is very well known in marketing and in the arena of sales and not so much leadership.
This is really interesting to me because you would think that the discipline or competency of influence should have a very strong place and foundation in leadership. And, one of the things that I love the most about this book is that you break it down to make it really simple for people to understand. So you say that influence is really broken down into three main sections: partnership, mentorship, and sponsorship. So can you talk to me a little bit about each of those and why they're so important?
Okay, sure. So the lens I looked was through relationship building. Was I became a higher contributing employee, and my success and career in Fortune 500 companies grew. And so it's these through three type of relationships. So partnerships, as I define, is when you have a key trusted relationship, a partner, and you guys are cooperating to get results. And the word, I love etymology. So the word partner means to share power or authority with one another. Perfect example. And in mentorship, that was a learning process between a mentee and a mentor, where the mentee is driving the relationship based on their own career goals and what they would like to accomplish. And the mentor is sort of evolved. They're not kind of, they're a little bit away from the sage on the stage or the guide on the side, which was some of the things they used to talk about. And they're really more just sharing their own knowledge. Um, as it's relevant to the questions the mentee is asking. And the etymology of mentor, the root is to think. So they're thinking partners. And I mean, it makes sense, right? But it's like when you dig into the etymology, I think it adds a whole nother layer to it. And then sponsorship happens when a leader is advocating for you by using their own social capital in a room you do not have access yet. They're opening the door. And they're doing that to you having growth opportunities, potentially even an actual promotion, greater responsibilities, and etymology of sponsor means a surety or guarantee. So that leader is kind of putting their own political capital on the line because they believe in you and your potential.
I love this because I think that you've just successfully boiled down what makes an effective leader in these three concepts. And I do want to drill down into each one of these individually because I think that with every single definition that you gave, I saw a wealth of things to explore. So, for example, let's talk about partnership, which you define as a trusted relationship in which you share authority or decision making ability. And one of the things that really occurs to me is that a lot of the organizations that we end up working with and talking to initially, they frequently come from a place where they don't really have sufficient levels of two-way trust to engage in partnership in that way. There's not really a willingness to share authority, and there's definitely not a practice of sharing authority at the organizational level. So you might have one or two, kind of one-off leaders who engage in partnership, but they're the exception rather than the rule. So given these observations, how can you as an employee lean into partnership even if you feel that trust and psychological safety is lacking at the corporate level?
Well, I mean, that's a case by case basis, right? And that's what I love about these influence principles. We're probably doing it subconsciously, okay? But like even something like the liking principle. When you're developing a brand new relationship with someone, I'll tell you a little bit of story because Dr. Cialdini said this story and he does it the best. So he's like, so he had a daughter who had his granddaughter. And so he used to love playing with his granddaughter. Well, one day his daughter asked the granddaughter, "Who do you like the best?" And without missing a beat, Dr. Cialdini is grandpa. And then Dr. Cialdini's daughter said, "Why?" He goes, "Oh, he likes me." And believe it or not, that like from the child of, the mouths of babes, right, comes this miraculous wisdom. When you're establishing a brand new relationship, lean in, like them. I mean, people pick up vibes, right? If you can lean in and be open and figure out what kind of makes that person tick, what they get excited about, then you are actually sincerely liking them. I mean, that's just the first one. I mean, there's a lot more. In fact, if I could, I'll layer one more onto it. Um, I love reciprocity, and I love it for this reason. Reciprocity, I think, most of us kind of know if you do something first for someone, then they're going to feel kind of an obligation. And this is true regardless of generation and regardless of geography. This has been proven by science. And it's like a light switch. You can turn on or activate the reciprocity if you do a favor. And many people do favors or give an actual tangible gift. You can give intangible gifts. And so if you're leaning in, getting to know someone, and you realize that there's something that you might have that they don't have as an intangible gift, you can do two things. One, you could give it to them. You could do listening. You could do saving them time, like you know how to do something and they don't. But the key is, and this is a secret, so I'm gonna tell you guys the secret, be ready. If they don't know and don't believe this is a gift because it's just unconscious to them, you need to bring it to their attention. It's completely ethical. And so gave an example at a recent training. Imagine this scenario. There's the manager of a CPA, and well, today's tax day. So anyway, I don't know when you're going to air this, but it's a very busy time for for CPAs. And the manager in this fictitious example is leaning in because the CPA on their face has something more they want to say. And what does that manager do? They say, I know that we only had a half hour. I have this big presentation in a half hour that I told you about. I was going to use this time to prep. It's more important to me to talk to you now. If this is a good time, do you want to take another 5 minutes or would you rather schedule for next week? Look at what you just did. You made them important. You brought it to top of mind. Very sincere. I mean, don't make these situations up. If they happen, then take advantage because you were going to do the favor anyway. But if they didn't know about it, then they're not granting you the reciprocity. They're not seeing how you're making those trade offs and putting them first.
So we've talked a little bit about partnership. One of the other attributes that really stood out to me was this idea of mentorship and taking a thought partner. I think that this is such a perfect definition of what mentorship really is. And I love that you broke that down with the etymology so that we could actually see that illustration. Could you talk a little bit more about mentorship and why that's so important for leadership influence?
Well, I think you and I've had these conversations. Really, the whole impetus for me opening up my own business is because I volunteered to create a mentorship program at the 11th largest company in the world. And I was working as an employee at Costco and I saw a need. And I also reflected about how much mentors made a huge positive impact in my life. And in fact, to be perfectly honest, right now I may be coming across as really confident. I was intermittently confident in my business career. Um, I had had some pretty, you know, uh, tough embarrassment situations as a child, and so sometimes I would get all excited about, like, "I have an idea, let's do it," and then I'd be like, "Uh-oh," but embarrassment comes, and so I had a huge, positive impact from a mentor, and he told me to kinda get out of my own way and get out of my comfort zone, and so what I ended up doing was I became a spokesperson for creating a mentorship program at Costco, and I found a sponsor. And believe it or not, if you ever eat the pumpkin pie at the Costco, bakery, it's Sue, my mentor's recipe.
Yeah, I saw like a million of those at Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Multiple millions. It's so crazy. They end up buying so much pumpkin, they have to store it for, like, a whole year to make it through the holiday. So, yeah, it's crazy. So Sue established the bakery, like, 30, 40 years ago, and she took a chance on me, and I tease people, sometimes they say it's the salad bar line I mean, the, elevator pitch. Oops, I gave away my punchline, but it turned out to be the salad bar line. And I used the idea of influence because I said to her, "Don't you wanna say yes to the 30 or 40 people that you don't have enough room in your current program to say yes to?" She goes, "Okay, Ellen, do a pilot." And so we started off with 2 rings and 17 people spread across those 2 rings, and then over the 5 years that I ran the program, we had graduated over 200 mentees. I had recruited 40 approximate VPs and leaders to serve. I mean, everybody just there were volunteer people that helped out and the mentors were helping out. But the key thing was that it was leveraged because for obviously, as you can understand, one-on-one mentorship is really hard to scale because executives and you yourself were executive. You've got your day job to do. I mean, you want to grow other people, but like, you're swiftly going to be, not doing anything else if you're doing mentorship the whole time. And so, this idea of circles and having or rings and having the mentees kind of work together towards figuring out what their goals were in their career and then going after what those human skills are. The old term is soft skills, whatever it is that they wanted to build and do it together. So, sort of a hidden leadership program for those mentees.
And the thing that really pops into my mind, Ellen, as we chat about mentorship, is I've never really been in an organization where mentorship was done in a systematic way. And so my experience is, I've definitely had mentorship experiences, but they were very dependent on me as the mentee trying to kind of elbow my way into relationships and rooms where I was not previously invited or expected. And then trying to have that defining moment so that a potential mentor would take interest in me, and then feeling really, I guess, just really unsure of how to navigate that, but what my participation levels should be. Now, that being said, I will say that the mentorship relationships that I've had have provided tremendous value for me personally. But I do think that one of those mysteries that I hadn't previously seen unlocked is how do organizations scale and systematize mentorship programs, and what are the benefits that they can expect to see by making that kind of investment? So I'm interested in your experience doing this for Costco. What were some of the challenges that you encountered with regards to mentorship at scale? And what are some ways of thinking about that ROI that you were able to achieve from mentorship programs that you instituted?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You have to have systems, and luckily, that's kind of my background. I did a lot of, process improvement and things like that, but we had to start with the idea and then sort of grow the program kinda organically. But there were 2 of us that were volunteering, and we kinda made the core team, and what we realized was we had to, like, literally put the project plan together. How was the year gonna unfold? This was a 9-month program, and so we had to, like, at a certain point, send out the invitations to apply and then review all the applications, and then once we had that figured out, we had to try to figure out how to organize the rings. In this case, we wanted the employees to meet as many people from different departments in the company as possible. This was at corporate and strengthening those relationships, and then we had to like figure out how to assign the mentors that were in their upline management chain. So we learned all of that through trial and error, but every year we got better and better. And so it got to the point, and especially for the mentors, because it was leveraged, I could pitch it to them legitimately and sincerely. You are going to get a chance to meet 12 to 18 people in a ring over 9 months, and you're literally only going to need to be there for 2 to 3 hours a month. That was it. And that would not be true in a one on one mentorship program. Now, Costco is very proud of its culture, and it should be because it's a pretty amazing culture. And so the 40 or so leaders that we recruited were very aligned with telling the relevant stories that helped inculcate or kind of spread the wonder of this culture. And they would have special stories, which if you're an employee, you know about, like um, the salmon story, because over time, Costco's all about continuous improvement, and it was always about how can we deliver a better salmon, package to the members, and so it became kind of a story, and so it just fit the culture. So to answer your question, trial and error, figuring it out, smart people, volunteering, and then mentors who just leaned in. It was really a beautiful thing.
Well, and in terms of ROI or benefits to your organization, I mean, I think there are a couple of really important things that you highlighted. So, one, there's the obvious piece, which is the professional development of the mentees in the program. They're receiving the benefit of talking to somebody more senior, more influential, getting visibility and exposure, and their advice and all of those great things. But then I love this idea of the rings, those peer-led communities where mentees are kind of helping each other and forming those cross-functional relationships. And what we find at Unity is we do a lot of learning experiences and trainings, and our favorite is when we get to do those trainings with cross-functional participants. Participants who don't normally work closely together, or if they do work closely together, it's very transactional. It's like, here's a project, here's the objective, and you don't really kind of get to know each other, and what makes you tick in an intrinsic level. And so I think that this cohort-based approach is really important too. But you know what? I love like having been an executive leader myself, I love this idea of, as an executive, getting exposure to a cohort of 18 or 20 people at a time and really kind of getting to see what the up and coming batch of potential high performers looks like within an organization. And from a talent development and succession planning and team building perspective, I think that's a really good way to get your eyes on what the talent pool looks like in the future. So I'm interested to hear, did you have any data or insight into the benefits of the way that you structured your mentorship program, that you guys felt and saw in the business?
Yeah, I have to say, of course, I know a lot more now since this is the focus of my company than I did back then being in IT. But I did look back at it. I'll give you this thought, because many people and many companies are doing engagement surveys. And so I don't have like a hard number, but this is what I could tell you because I looked at the questions on the engagement survey that Gallup does as an example. And I can't think of one strategic investment that a company could do to address 75% of those 12 questions. And a leverage mentorship will. A leverage mentorship program will help move the dial. I don't have any metrics on it because at that time we weren't actually able to like connect the dots between and there was, we were at one point at the height, we had like 70 people. And this is like 5,600 approximately, or maybe 6,000 at corporate. But Really, I think that's a metric that they hopefully there's the program's still going, so, and I'm friends with the gal that runs it, so maybe I'll ask her to see if they could do some more research into that. But really think about that. What one program could you do that moves the dial on 75% of those questions? And the second and the second thing I'll leave you with is that, and this is more like, individual testimonials for the program. But because and I'll first I'll say, I'll tease you, but, what's the best way to learn something? Teach it. Teach it, right? Yeah, you and Sarah would say, "Teach it," right? And so, guess what? These mentors were actually having, or the mentees were actually researching this skill that they wanted to learn and teach, and they would do that in a ring. Well, if they were savvy, and we had a couple of them that were, they asked their upline management to come and watch their presentation. We had one lady who talked about how she could get the word out on self leadership and kind of evangelizing the skills she has so that she would be more visible for promotion. And she is giving that presentation in front of two people that are higher up in the org, saying, "You have to do this at all hands." So think about what the extra visibility are for mentees that can lean in. And these mentors want to open up the door. That's what they want to do. They want the goodness of excited team members that are leaning in, that are teaching. This was completely outside of what they were getting paid to do. This was their own self-development, but I kind of used to tease in a positive way with all the mentees. You're building the career ladder together, you know, right? Because 'Cause they're working together. There was 2 or 3 people that would actually work on this teaching presentation and facilitating, and many of these roles were in IT, so they didn't have to facilitate like many of us IT people did, where it may be more natural, and so I became a little bit of a teaching person around how you facilitate.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, what a great benefit, because a lot of these skills that you're talking about, Ellen, it occurs to me that there aren't really a lot of systematic ways for employees to get those lessons in a structured and organizationally sponsored kind of way. And so I think it's actually a more common experience for employees to feel almost like a helpless victim of the performance management and professional development process, right? Because but what you've created here with the mentorship program at Costco is this container where you're getting access to activities and engagements that help you to develop those skills, but then you can also leverage that for your own visibility and network building and really paving the way for future promotability. So I feel the benefits of the program that you built for Costco are just really significant. And one of the reasons why it might have been hard to quantify total impact is because impact is multiplicative throughout the organization and throughout multiple attributes of the organization too.
Absolutely. The one statistic I love to tell people, because it was easy to measure, was word of mouth was so great. From year 2 to year 1, we had over 350% increase in uptake in the program. So we went from 2 rings to 5 rings, like, oop, it was like overnight. And that was just like so heartwarming, because you're right. People in corporate are hungry. They're hungry for learning, and it doesn't have to be, and they're okay. I guess it doesn't have to be a situation where they're receiving it. They're willing to roll up their sleeves and actually figure it out on their own, but do that in a, like you said, there was a structure, but it was a flexible structure. And the way that we did it at Costco doesn't have to be the way every single, leverage mentorship program would work. I learned about this basic structure when I was a co-mentor at Microsoft, because they had something similar at Microsoft. So that's what's so awesome. You could tailor it to the company and to the needs of, the employees.
Yeah, I love this. And I love the fact that you're bringing in these logos like Microsoft and Costco, because one of the things that we talk a lot about at Unity in our work with prospects and clients is really kind of getting people to look and see and stop to evaluate the macro landscape. And if you look at the macro landscape of what's happening right now, that's impacting businesses across the world, there's a myriad of things. But one of the most impactful things is we have an aging workforce. We have 5 generations actively employed in the workforce at this point in time. A lot of senior positions are still being occupied by baby boomers. But from a mathematical perspective, baby boomers are going to be exiting the workforce at rates that younger generations just cannot numerically keep up with. And that's a tough challenge to solve in and of itself. But then there was a study done by DDI, which is a leadership consulting firm, that was published a year or two ago. And they were evaluating millennials and Gen Z and self-assessing or asking them to self-assess their readiness, and asking them, do you feel ready to take these mid and senior level leadership positions? And the overwhelming response is no, we are not ready. Our schooling did not prepare us for the realities of the workforce. And even more than that, if you zoom in even further, the thing that they feel that they're most insecure about in terms of skills mastery is a lot of these softer, unwritten skills that you can only really develop within the context of something like a mentorship program. So otherwise, you're just kind of navigating your career blindly. And I think, like, we're seeing today a lot of disillusionment and disenfranchisement in the workforce, due to the combination of the fact that, a lot more senior positions are not coming available as quickly as they were hoping, but also coupled with the fact that they don't feel qualified already to take these roles anyway. And they don't feel organizationally sponsored or developed to grow into that ability into the future. And so what you see right now is a lot of employee loyalty being at historical lows because they don't feel that they have a path to success within their organization. And ultimately, it's the organizations that will suffer. In the short term, the employees are bemoaning the state of things, but in the long term, unless you're Costco, unless you're Microsoft, your future's not secure because you're going to end up developing these holes in very similar positions in the future, and they're going to remain unfilled for extended periods of time unless you can start now in developing and cultivating that talent.
Yeah, actually in that baby boomer generation. Maybe I'm outing myself on your podcast, but but gone are the days with the General Electric back in those, the manager rotation. Gone are those days in most companies. And so what that means is it's incumbent, and that's why I very clearly articulated that a mentorship responsibility is driven by the mentee. They have to figure out how to get the equivalent of that rotation, in terms of their exposure to it could be different projects if they, it doesn't have to be different departments, but it could be that too. They have to figure out their own roadmap. And so that's and they could still do that in conjunction with a mentor who's kind of seen it, at that particular company or at others. And so I'm totally agreeing with you. One other thing I want to throw out, and I don't have the statistics completely at hand, but I will tell you this. The different generations have a different attitude around mentorship. Um, the baby boomers think it's the way to get ahead. The greatest generation didn't really care about it too much. And the younger generations think it's the way they do work every day. So think about that for a minute. That could be a clash, right? So you have a mentee in a younger generation who thinks, well, mentorship is how I do my job every day. And then you have older generation, leaders or mentors thinking, "Only talk to me once a month," and we'll make it a half hour, like, laser focused thing. And so there's some, like, teaching that has to be done going back to how do you structure this, right? Around, well, what's the role of a mentee? What's the role of a mentor? And can we make sure that from the very beginning that relationship is off to a good start with proper expectations?
I hate to move on for mentorship because I feel like we could probably do half a dozen episodes on just mentorship and the importance of that and what you built at Costco. But can we talk a little bit about sponsorship and what that is? And if you could remind me of the definition and why that's important.
Yeah, sponsorship happens when a leader is advocating for you and using their own social capital in a room you don't have access to yet. So they're creating opportunities for advancement, whether that's increased responsibilities, it could be a special project, it could actually be a promotion. And so I think sponsorship is so important, and I honestly I was kind of the thought, and I think this may be typical for my generation, like, "Well, I'll just work real hard and they'll notice." And I was lucky they did, but what I didn't completely figure out was that I was getting sponsors. You know, I was working real hard. I wasn't working to try to get a sponsor. And I think that it's not a bad thing to actually be that aware and think, who is sponsoring me? How can I develop those relationships? And so this is another way where I think the influence skill is has so much promise for people, because there are ways you can establish relationships with senior executives and get sponsors. It's not necessarily going to be the easiest thing, but it's better than just waiting for accident to happen, which sort of was a little bit like my story. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the benefit of our listeners out there, some of which may be earlier in their career, securing a sponsor might seem like a daunting directive. Sometimes these senior leaders are just so far above you, they feel like they're almost untouchable. They seem inaccessible. And even though, they're human beings just like you and me. And so what are some ways that somebody on the more junior end of the totem pole can try to cultivate sponsorship without being overly salesy or obnoxious about it?
yeah. Well, I think it just goes back to some of those influence principles that we were talking about. The good thing about many leaders is that they usually are in front of their companies in some way. And so as an employee, you can start to understand kind of what do they value? I even at one point wanted to know, like, through the grapevine, what is that leader reading? What book is he reading? You know? So start kind of getting curious, because if they're reading about something and then you can have a point of view on it or know a different book, now that's a kind of a reciprocity thing as a possibility. What are the big challenges? Leaders actually more and more are going on podcasts even, but even within their companies. So there may be a way for you to get your finger on the pulse of what keeps them up at night. What are they reading? What are their big challenges? What do they see for the organization? And I mean, the most important thing I can think of, honestly, is to figure out how what you're doing links up to their mission, values, their deliverables, because they don't know your job. They're too busy. Their job is big enough. And sometimes leaders, and we found this at Costco, our mentors, we had an open door policy at Costco. And so it was really helpful for the mentees to know that legitimately these VPs say, come visit me. And they would want to ask questions about what the mentees are doing every day, because they don't know the details of your job and what's challenging. And so those are some ways to kind of get the overall view of it. But the key thing is to just lean into how can you help them reach their goals? Either through your job, through volunteering in some other manner, and ask the question of peers, because a lot of people in the organization, it's going to be very obvious. We're all working like AI is a great big example these days. Okay, so AI can streamline processes. So maybe that's an opportunity. I found that there were change management things going on. And I was in an IT org when I was at Costco, and they were going to go through this huge reinvention. Well, you can volunteer, get extra training, be a leader even without the title. Just some ideas.
Oh man, I think that is such a pro tip. And I think it's really easy when you work in organizations, especially when you're early career, to kind of just take your orders and march to them, right? And not really kind of punch above your weight class or play outside the sandbox very much. But if you think about it, for myself individually anyway, I think the moments where I was able to cultivate relationships that later on helped me to advance in my career were the moments where I did exactly that. And on the flip side, the moments where I felt the most confident about sponsoring somebody else are those moments where they approached me with ideas and a level of engagement that was uncommon based off of the seat that they sat in at that point. And it actually really reminds me of a story of very early in my career. So I was working on this project. And to use your terms here, I had informally and unwittingly secured a mentor who was very senior within the organization. And he pulled me into this project that was just way above my pay grade and my job level, but it was a test. And I found that out in due time. But he was really just trying to see what I would come up with. So he took myself and one other gentleman who was about the same age, very early career. We're like lower level management employees, and he gave us this business problem, which is how do we as a financial services organization do sales performance management when this organization that we worked for typically had an aversion to sales, like sales was a four-letter word culturally within this organization. So it was really kind of a tall order because we couldn't leverage any existing frameworks because our sales culture was very different contextually based off of that. And so I worked really hard with them and the partner that they had set me up with on this project for a couple of weeks, and we presented out to our executive sponsor, and we were really nervous about it. But he loved it, and instead of just saying that, this is great, good job, you guys, and leaving it at that, what he ended up saying is, okay, this is great. So let me pause here. Could you guys have come to this answer on your own? And we're like, we looked at each other and we said, yeah, I think we could have come to this answer on our own, like given enough time and the prompt to think about it, we could have come up with something pretty similar to what we did this time. And then he said, well, let me ask you another question. Did you feel like this was a problem before I asked you to solve it? And we thought about it and we said, yeah, actually, we did feel like it was a little bit of a problem. And obviously we need to reconcile this idea of how we sell and how we do it in a culturally appropriate way. And then his final question was, so why didn't you do it until I asked you to do it? And so I looked at my buddy across the desk and then I was the brave one or maybe the stupid one who ended up speaking. And I said, well, sometimes it just feels like you're kind of in this box based off of your responsibility and your role. And I swear the pride that was in his eyes just vanished, and I saw a flicker of anger. And he slammed his hand on the desk and he goes, there is no box. For the rest of your life, do not forget that there is no box. And he said, if you see a problem that needs to be solved and you have the skill and perspective to do it, then go solve that problem. Go talk to the person who's in charge of solving that problem and tell them what you're thinking. And I'm so grateful to him that even though his delivery, I think, was a little bit on the extreme side, relative to the magnitude of the point that he was trying to make, it stuck with me to this day. And it's definitely a mantra that I've had that has helped me to drive my own development, even in unstructured organizations, or maybe especially in unstructured organizations where there are no formally sponsored approaches to drive your own personal development because of that. And so I think I like this idea of really actively thinking about the context in which you operate, not just the job that you have today, and actively pursuing conversations with people who are trying to solve those problems. And, going back to your principle of reciprocity, that really comes into play here too, right? It's like you give them value from your vantage point of how you think that the problem can be solved. And of course, you're going to be the first person they think of if there's an opportunity to have somebody like you on the team and actually implement the solution.
I just love that, and I'm glad that he actually had such a kind of slammy because it was so memorable for you. And I know that what the very senior person thinks is the culture of a company could be very different down at lower levels. And so depending upon, I mean, we all, I think people know that it's about your boss, pretty much, your longevity in a particular job or a particular company. And so the question then becomes, is it safe for you to do some amount of risk taking? And I mean like thoughtful risk taking, like reviewed risk taking. And so, I mean, we're not going to dive into that too much, but that's the thought that came into my head. And as a senior leader, that somehow has to get through the org, that it's okay. I tease that, of course, we're in our own business, so we have our websites, but like the A/B test, it's like, I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try this. And, there has to be some amount of, this idea it's okay to have a small failure that was learning, and that's what, agile development was all about, which I was in IT. You have these tests, you do working software in 2 weeks, and you give it in front of your client, they say, "Tweak that, tweak this is good." And so, you gotta get those cycles faster, and you have to have the openness of the culture, and so but that was amazing that you actually explicitly got that from, go and do it, like, be risky, have ideas. And I think that there's a certain amount upon each of us to take that. Not every culture is going to be right for every employee who's like that. But I have been sort of told that I was an entrepreneur sometimes. When, that's good or bad depending on your point of view, of your manager. Like, I'd be like, mostly, "Tell me where I'm going, and I'll figure out how to get there, see you later." But it's like, to get ahead in careers for employees, don't just solve the problems you have. Try to figure out how you would solve the problems your manager has, your manager's manager. And you don't have to actually solve them, but you can still use your noggin. You can still have conversations. I'm sure the managers may be interested in having you as a thinking partner, or that could be a possibility anyway. So I just love that story.
Yeah, I mean, you could mentor your manager just by being a thinking partner from a different vantage point. Because you're right. You mentioned AI implementation, and I think that's one of the areas where this is absolutely true. You have very senior leaders that are thinking about AI implementation from a functional capability perspective, but you have people on the ground that are actually practitioners and users of AI, and they have much more tangible information on of this and how they would actually use it in practice and what the limitations are in practice. And sometimes as leaders, you spend so much time in closed door environments talking about the need for a big strategic change, but you're not careful. And if you're not careful, you don't create that open door for people who are actually interfacing with the tools and the change that you're going to be implementing to have an open voice in the conversation. And so then you risk developing some huge blind spots that could completely undermine the viability of the initiative itself.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier in our conversation about this idea of cross functional. This is where my business process hat's going to come on. You know how rare it is to find someone in a process who understands two steps upstream that's outside of your department and two streams downstream. It is so rare that even that amount of knowledge, let alone the end to end process, could go across departments. And with AI, what are you going to do? You're going to insert a tool for automation in a process that's cross department. So people have to kind of put a bigger thinking hat on, not just this, but, and in supply chain, I'm going to bring my supply chain. We really don't want to sub optimize because you could have perfect fill rate as an example, but then your inventory costs are way too high because you have too much inventory, right? So you have to have like this balanced scorecard kind of approach, which is you want to optimize the entire end-to-end process, which in any particular department might be sub-optimizing, but you're looking through the eyes of across the organization, and that's still true today. And AI could be one of those examples.
Well, Ellen, I want to thank you so much for being here on the show with us and just for running over some of the major concepts that you talk about in your book, The Influence Advantage. Your book is available for purchase. What's the best way to get your hands on it if we have listeners here who are interested?
Oh, well, they could go to Amazon, or they could just go to my website. I have a book page on my website, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone and see what they thought of the chapter, and if there's any way I can help them.
Fantastic. And could you give your website and how people can best get in touch with you if they're interested in asking you questions or potentially even working with you?
Yeah, it's my name, ellensidell.com. And I actually have two different ways on the website. Well, it says book a call with Ellen, and it'll take you to a form. And I always like to be prepared for what you want to talk to me about it. And then you'll fill out the form and then you'll get on my calendar right away. Yeah, Scott, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for rolling out the red carpet for me. I've loved this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for all of the value that you've brought into my life personally, and also just for all of our listeners. I think this is exactly the kind of content that we love to have here on the show because I think it really helps to demystify the entire ecosystem of what's happening in the workplace. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our enlightening conversation today with Ellin Sidell. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what Unity and Company can do for you, you can drop us a line at info@unityandcompany.com and we'll get right back to you. We'll catch you next time.